Today we are going to learn about solving quadratic equations using the square root property. So what is the square root property? The square root property tells you that if x squared is equal to k, what you are going to do is you are going to take the square root to both sides, and then you are going to have that x is going to be equal to plus minus the square root of k. That is, the solution set of x squared equals k is going to be either negative k with the square root or positive square root of k, which may be abbreviated as plus minus the square root of k. Okay, so for the following examples, what we're going to do is we're going to use the square root property to solve each quadratic equation. Okay, so you have x squared is equal to 17, and clearly your x is not alone because you have that square. So what you're going to do here, both sides, is you are going to take the square root to both sides. Okay, once you do that, you have that x is going to be equal to plus minus the square root of 17. You know that 17 is not an exact square root, so you can either leave it like that, or the other option that you have that I would recommend you to is you can plug that one in your calculator. Okay, so you plug square root of 17. Okay, so you have that the square root of 17 is going to be this decimal number. Okay, if you are using decimals, I would recommend you to use 3 decimal places. Okay, so any of this is one of your answers. Okay, so you can write it like this. Okay, or another way with the decimal, plus minus 4.123. Okay, so that would be your answer. Now let's move on to this one. This one is a little bit more interesting because you have the x squared equals negative 25. So you take the square root of both sides, and you need to remember when we were talking about complex numbers. So the square cancels with the square root, having x is going to be equal to plus minus, and it's going to be the square root of negative 25. Here you need to remember, okay, so we have a negative. It means that the I will appear, and then the square root of 25, you know that it's 5. Therefore, you have that x is going to be equal to plus minus 5i. So the notation, the solution is going to be plus minus 5i. Okay, and that's going to be your answer. Now for the next one, what do you have here? Okay, so you have the square, well, x squared equals negative 196. So you take out the square root to both sides, having x is going to be equal to plus minus the square root of negative 196. And you realize, oh, I have the negative, so that's an I, and the square root of 196 is 14. So you have that x is going to be equal to plus minus 14i. Okay, meaning your answer is going to be plus minus 14i. Okay, that's your answer. Now, number 4, it's a little bit more interesting. Why? Okay, on one side you have 2x squared minus 30, and on the other one that's equal to x squared minus 111. Okay, so we're going to do what your Algebra 1 teacher recommended you to do. You need to move the like terms to one side and the other like terms to the other side. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to choose to move the quadratic terms to the left side. So I have 2x squared minus x squared. So this one comes negative to the other side. Now I have the equal, so this negative 111, it stays negative, but this one, I'm going to pass it positive to the other side. With this being said, you have that 2x squared minus x squared is going to be just x squared, and on the other side you have that negative 111 plus 30, that's going to be negative 81. Once you have the situation, what I recommend you to do, obviously, is ask yourself, is my x by itself? And the answer is no, because you have that square. So how can we get rid of that square? You can take the square root to both sides. Okay, please note that I'm taking the square root when my thing that it's square, it's alone on the other side. Okay, so I take my square root, I have that x is going to be equal to plus minus, and then you see the I and you're like, okay, so I know that it's going to be an I, and the square root of 81 is 9, So that's going to be your answer. So I write it as with the answer notation, and that's going to be your answer. Cool? So let's move on to the last one on this page. Okay, so the last one on this page, you realize that it's quite similar to 4, but we only have 2 constant terms. So kind of like the same, you leave the quadratic term on the left side, so you have negative 8a squared. It's going to be equal to negative 52, and this 2 you pass it opposite to the other side, having this. So you have negative 8a squared is going to be equal to negative 50. Okay? Once you have that, you need to ask yourself, is the a squared by itself? And the answer is no, because you have that negative 8 in front. So how can you get rid of that negative 8? Well, by dividing both sides by the negative 8. Okay? So you have the situation here, and you realize, okay, so obviously this cancels, so I have a squared is going to be equal, negative and negative they cancel, and then 50 divided by 8, you know that you can simplify as 25 divided by 4. Okay? So once you simplify that, you're like, okay, so I'm going to take the square root. So you take the square root to both sides, having a is going to be equal, and you're like, okay, the square root of 25 is going to be what? 5, and the square root of 4 is going to be 2. Okay, so you know that your answer in this situation is going to be plus minus 5 divided by 2. Okay,